So before this video starts, I just want to say this video's been blocked 8 times, took a lot of editing, a lot of recording. So if you guys could please leave a like, comment, subscribe if you enjoyed this video. I put a lot of work into it, but enjoy. Now, I don't know if it's because a new movie is coming out this year or because Netflix has just recently added all the movies onto their site, but I've been seeing a lot of the Hunger Games recently, which is crazy because I was just thinking to myself that what happened to all the dystopian style TV shows and movies, and of course that was spearheaded by the Hunger Games. Now with the new movie coming out this year, I thought I'd go back in while Netflix gives me the opportunity with all the movies on one site and rewatch everything, so you don't have to. You could dive back into your favorite movie, book, whatever way you chose to enjoy this series. I want to dive back into it and look into how good these movies actually were and review them before the new one comes out at the end of the year. I remember going watch these movies when I was in middle school, and now I'm a full adult. I'm 20 years old now, and I remember watching the movies. I only read the first book, I believe. I never read all the books, but I know I watched all the movies, read the first book, and that all happened in middle school, and I haven't really revisited since. So I'm really looking forward to diving back in everything to do with these movies, the plot, the scenery, cinematography, everything. Just talk about each and every one of them, give each of them a rating, and just see if they hold up to this day, basically. So we're going to do this movie by movie, definitely give each a ranking, and who knows, if this series continues, I might dive into other dystopian style shows and movies, such as The Maze Runner, Divergent, of course, and even The 100. So what we're gonna do is I want to do a 5 to 10 minute quick movie plot, what I liked about the movie, what I hated for each movie. It's gonna be like 5 to 10 minutes, talk about everything within each of the 4 movies, and then at the end I want to talk about the franchise as a whole. Is it a classic masterpiece, how prestigious it is, and that's what I want to get into at the end. But let's jump into each movie by itself first. So no more stalling. Let's see if all the hype was worth it or if the movies even stand up to today. Let's get into it. So if you don't know, The Hunger Games is a dystopian movie set in North America where there are 12 districts who force each district to select a boy and girl called tributes to compete in a nationally televised event called The Hunger Games. Every citizen must watch as those kids fight to the death until only one remains. It's there where we get our District 12 tribute, Katniss Everdeen, played by Jennifer Lawrence, who has to rely on her skills as a hunter, sharp instincts, and is put into an arena where she must weigh survival against love. Now, the first thing I want to say is, honestly, the movie was even better than I remembered it. The first Hunger Games, of course, we're talking about here, and it was better than I even remembered it when I first watched it. And it's honestly maybe because I missed the dystopian style shows or movies, and we just get a lack of that nowadays, but it honestly was better than I first remembered it. I honestly think the first movie has a great pace. Like, some scenes are slower and could be sped up a little, and some things go by fast and can be slowed down, but overall throughout the whole movie for a 2-hour plus runtime, it's really well paced, I would say. I think this movie does a great job at putting a spotlight on the Hunger Games and showing how big of a spectacle it is before it even get into the match and the fights. It's funny because while watching this, I was like, whoa, wouldn't it be amazing if they had a video game like the Hunger Games where we're all in one arena, we fight to the death, one winner? But then I realized that's just battle royales. They had to be inspired by Hunger Games of some form of this, because I was just laughing thinking about it. A Hunger Games style game would be amazing. And I'm like, wait, isn't that just battle royales? Of course, battle royales use guns and different things, but I'm like, that's just battle royales nowadays. So it was crazy a movie like this came out in that time. I also, rewatching this, got some feelings of Squid Game, and I know Squid Game isn't a dystopian society, but the way the games play out and the spectacle that it is, I feel like they had to take some inspiration from Hunger Games. So I give them big ups for that, as well as it kind of does relate or have parts in shows and games and different type of media that we get today still. Of course, there are a few gripes with this movie. Not many. It's just like most of the characters that are in the Hunger Games are miscellaneous dweeb characters we don't really care about. We do get a few good moments with Rue, of course, and things like that. But overall, the other characters in the games aren't really developed or thought out. The main focus is on Peter and Katniss, of course. So I mean, that's okay, I guess, but that's really one of my biggest gripes. The second one would be the slow down shots sometimes, and when the sound is completely distorted or gone, and they give this eerie sound to give like this feeling like so much is going on. But honestly, it's like a feeling of overwhelmingness, I guess, is what they're trying to get through our heads. But honestly, it makes some of the scenes awkward, even laughable, or just weird when they do that. And the slowing down, the eeriness, the little siren, it just throws everything off. But those are easily my two biggest gripes with the first movie. I of course wish the kills was a bit more gory and more shown and seen, but of course the movies were PG-13. They got to get all the audience they could get, so they couldn't really show much. But overall, it was a great movie. I thought about going back and read the books and see how faithful of an adaptation these movies are, because a lot of things get adapted today and you always look at the source material to compare it. But honestly, I didn't feel like reading all those books, to be honest, and I just wanted to see how faithful of an adaptation it really was. So when looking online, I think most people agreed it was pretty faithful to the source material with a few nuanced differences, so I guess that's okay. And of course, this first movie was a huge success, grossing over 600 million, close to 700 million in the box office at the time of this video recording, which set off the whole chain of events of other dystopian societies, movies, etc. But as an introduction to the franchise, it did great with the world building. Like, of course, we didn't get everything fully scoped out because, of course, we were gonna get sequels. But for a first movie, it did a great job introducing the characters, the world building, the Hunger Games, the spectacle of it all. And honestly, to give this movie a rating, I would honestly give it a 8.5 out of 10, especially for a beginning of a series, knowing you're gonna have sequels. It did a pretty good job. So the first Hunger Games, 8.5 out of 10. I also wanted to compare my ratings to the ratings of the past and how people graded it, the critics, the audience scores back then. So I checked Rotten Tomatoes. They had around an 84% for the critics, 80% for the audience, and I gave it an 8.5. So I think that goes to say the movie definitely holds up till today. It still is every bit as good and enjoyable, even though I had my few critiques and moments. I think it pretty much stands up, and we'll be doing this for all the movies to compare the audience, critics scores, and how I think they hold up to today. So we'll continue to do this for each movie. Also, this movie and the following movies going forward had a great cast of actors, and I feel like everybody pretty much played their role to, I wouldn't say perfection, but pretty well. It's hard to dislike any main character, especially as the course of the movies go. I think they did a pretty good job casting the characters overall. And I'm recording each part, like once I finish the movie, I record before I jump into the next one. So my thoughts are raw for that movie exactly and isn't tangled up and jumbled into the whole series as a whole. So what we're gonna do is at the end of each movie, we're gonna say what I think could be added to the movie to make the sequel better, etc. And all I really have for this one is I really want better kills, better characters to kill in the Hunger Games. Those are my two biggest gripes, and I'm pretty sure as the amount of money this movie made, the budget for it is gonna go up, so everything's gonna get better. But I don't know if the kills will, because like I said, it had to be PG-13 so kids could watch. But all I really want is better kills and better characters in the Hunger Games. So let's jump into Catching Fire and see how that goes. And that's how you do a fucking sequel. But before we dive in everything, let's get into the movie plot like we did for the first one. So at the end of the first movie, of course, Peter and Katniss almost ate the berries, almost both died, and the Capitol couldn't go without them having a winner for the Hunger Games. So they allowed them both to live because they were allegedly in love. So this is following directly after the first movie. They have to go on a tour of all the districts and convince the world that they are in love and to stop a rebellion. Now, if I have any gripe with this movie, it is the rebellion, but we'll talk about that later. Back into the plot. So they're trying to get the Capitol, wants them to stop a rebellion, the uprising they feel is coming. So they have to convince the whole world that they are in love. With failing to do this, they are forced to go back into the 75th annual Hunger Games, where each district's tribute has to be a former winner, meaning Katniss and Peter has to go right back into the Hunger Games, but this time against even more deadly and worthy opponents. And this is honestly fucking brilliant. The new arena for the Hunger Games was fucking amazing. Definitely a major upgrade in its own right. That's worth watching the second movie after the first movie alone. They do give you a bit more characters, not necessarily to care about, but they give a few more dialogues and they continue along the rest of the story, and I think they'll be in the rest of the movies. I don't know. Like I said, I'm recording this after each and every movie, but they gave us Finnick, they gave us Joanna, so I'm guessing they're going to be in the later movies because they had a lot to do with the rebellion later on in the movie. So we got character improvement, we got the arena major improvement, and honestly, the setup to get to the Hunger Games was just as good as the first movie. Now, you do notice I did say I had a problem with the rebellion because I felt like it was constantly brought up, of course, to set up the third and fourth final movies. But I feel like this movie was so good, it could have been its own self-contained movie within itself, even without the first one. Now, honestly, this movie is easily better than the first one because of how well the first one sets this one up. It feels like a natural continuation and progression. That's why this movie is clearly better than the first one. So literally the only gripe I had was the constant mention of a rebellion, basically just foreshadowing the third and fourth movies. I don't know how much of this they do in the book to foreshadow what's coming, but they just kept constantly putting it in your face. But easily it's better than the first movie. The build-up is just as good, if not better, with the Katniss and Peter showing having to pretend they're in love, etc. And then still showing how big a spectacle it was. The stakes being higher than ever because they're going against other winners that were previously in the Hunger Games. And then the Hunger Games, the final act in itself is just brilliant and amazing. When she shoots the arrow, they escape, and it sets up the third and fourth movie. Now, even though I said I didn't like how they kept constantly mentioning the rebellion, of course, to be in the future movies, I do think they set it up and presented it very well. They made the side characters feel important. Like I said, Joanna, Finnick, etc. They made them feel like they had importance, whereas the enemies in the first Hunger Games, they were just there to get killed off, really had no personality, no character traits. So they felt some level of importance to the side characters in this movie. There aren't too many sequels, prequels, requels, or spin-offs or any shows or movies that get better or consistently good, but I could definitely say this sequel definitely was better and superior than the first one, and that doesn't happen very often with sequels, prequels, requels. Like I said, even with all the mention of the rebellion, it made me excited to see the third and fourth movie. Now, I remember hearing those movies weren't as good, but with the second one being this good and this amazing, I'm actually optimistic going into the final movies to see how those play out. The cast still did every bit as good as this movie as they did in the first one, I believe. The budget was definitely higher and insane. Looking just at the new arena alone, the scenery, cinematography, everything was just so on point. And so I checked the box office for this movie, and it made almost a whopping 200 mil more than the prior first movie, with grossing over 800 million at the time of recording this video. Now, when looking this up, I accidentally seen this was the highest grossing movie they had, so now I'm a little less optimistic for the last two movies, but this movie alone makes this whole series worth it, in my opinion. I think it says a lot about a movie, and I said this about the first one, and it's even more proven in the second one, that before the final act, before the Hunger Games even come, the setup and build up could be considered even better than the Hunger Games themselves. They do everything flawlessly. And when I went on Rotten Tomatoes to get the score for this movie, it was 90% or more for the critics, 89 for the viewers. So I think these people held it in higher regard than the first one, and I absolutely agree. I give it a rating of a 9.5. Literally, I don't see how it could get much better than this, especially when doing something like a rebellion. Rebellions could go, it's either on point or it's off. So the later movies might not be able to keep this magic that the first two had, especially this second one. And once again, I want to talk about what I would like to see in the third movie, going into the rebellion. Really, I want to continue to see the use of Joanna and Finnick. Like I said, after the first movie, I wanted some characters that had stuff to do, they were important, or they felt like they were important to the story, and they made that happen in the second movie. So I want them to continue to utilize those type of characters. I'm also hoping, since it's Mockingjay Part 1 and Part 2, it isn't split into like this one is all of the fighting and this one is all set up leading up to it. I'm hoping it's one big sequence. It feels like one story, because if one of them is just set up, that makes the movie unnecessary. I know they only had 3 books, so I'm guessing they split the last book into 2 movies to make more money. So I'm hoping by them doing that, they don't fuck everything up. And last, I think I want an important character to die going into the last movie to make it feel impactful. If they're going to split up the stories, something groundbreaking and impactful need to happen in the third movie to make everything feels like it's still going at a constant rate. Everything makes sense, like it's going at a steady rate to lead all the way up to the rebellion. Because if they're still planning the rebellion in the third movie after what happened at the end of the second one, I don't think that really makes sense. But what do I know? I never read the books. Like I said, I only read the first one. But let's go ahead and jump into Mockingjay Part 1. Well, that's very unfortunate. Now, Mockingjay Part 1. Where do we start? So I guess the plot of the movie plot is, at the end of the second movie, Catching Fire, of course, Katniss, they take her to District 13 to be the new leader in the face of the rebellion. And most of the movie is centered around convincing her to be the Mockingjay, to lead these people. And it's honestly just a bunch of political propaganda back and forth by the Capitol and by the people of the rebellion, back and forth. They do one thing, they answer back. They do another, they answer back. Katniss does a promo. They put Peter on TV for all the districts, telling them they shouldn't start a war. Peter's look like a traitor, blah, blah, blah. They're just going back and forth with political propaganda, basically, to lead into the rebellion. And honestly, this movie is just completely set up for the last and final movie, and that's just unfortunate and really sad to think about. I think I'm going to put the Mockingjays Part 1 and 2 in the same section instead of separate them, because they should be all in one movie. But if my tone changes halfway through this, it's because I'm on the second one and I might think that one is amazing. But the third one, I think, more problems with it than I enjoyed it. And my biggest one being that the scenery, like they was bunkered down in a bunker, shelter, or whatever for majority of the movie. And from going from the second movie with that amazing arena shots, scenery, cinematography, all that, to this one, everything was dull, gray, void of color. And I don't know, the shots just weren't, not that the shots were bad, but because of where they were located, they just didn't look as good as the second movie. One of the good shots compared to the rest of the movie is when they was out at the lake. They was going around shooting the videos for Katniss. There was just the lake, the scenery, and everything was just amazing. And also, you guys already heard me say in the second movie, I had a problem with them constantly mentioning the rebellion, setting it up for the third and fourth movie. This movie is literally all set up. At least in the second movie, the setup to the Hunger Games, everything that took place made sense. It was valid. It was going in the right direction. This one is all set up. Literally, I don't think anything in particular that's important necessarily happens in this movie. We knew the rebellion was coming, and it still hasn't technically happened yet. It started, but come on now, like nothing happened in this movie if you really think about it. Like, the main problem in this movie was convincing Katniss to be the Mockingjay to lead the rebellion, and all she really wanted was to save Peter from the Capitol. And like I said, it was a lot of political propaganda going back and forth, Capitol versus her, putting stuff out for each of the districts to see. And by the end of this movie, she gets Peter back. He isn't the same, of course. He's not the same person because of what the Capitol did to him. But it feels like they were void of all consequences, I guess, and nothing necessarily came out of the movie. And I said I wanted an impactful death. Also, wait, let me jump into this. Another problem I have is Finnick, Joanna, any other characters really have no importance to the story anymore. Finnick, who I thought was one of the best characters in the second movie, is basically casted off to a side role. He has a very few lines. He's not the same character, definitely, from the second movie. He really doesn't do much of anything. Like, literally, while recording this, I was looking for clips of him from this movie to put in, and I couldn't really even find any. And I wasn't about to go back through to watch the whole movie to find any, but I thought these characters were good and would have some levels of importance. And maybe they do in the fourth movie, but in the third movie, they literally did absolutely nothing. So when you combine, I don't want to say worse cinematography, because nothing was necessarily wrong with it, but it was just more dull and void compared to the prior two movies. So when you have that and it's not as a beautiful and amazing shots as prior, then you have characters who were seen as vital or fun or just good characters that are being overshadowed, cast off into these side roles. And then also the whole movie being set up for the last movie. You kind of don't know what to do with this film or how to feel about it. So they only had 3 books, and they split the last book into 2 movies, obviously for monetary reasons, and it grossed over 700 million. Not as much as the second movie, more than the first, but not as much as this prior movie. And I sincerely think if they did this movie right with the fourth movie and made it one big movie and did it correctly, it could have easily grossed over $1 billion. But we'll talk about that when we get to the fourth movie and to the conclusion of the whole franchise. So like I said, it did gross over 700 million, but not as much as the second movie, which grossed 200 million more than its prior movie. So this could have easily made $1 billion if done right. But it probably shows that people weren't as receptive and viewed the movie how I'm viewing it now, as just clearly set up and it's not really necessary to watch. Like, I want to see how important these events that took place in this one have in the fourth movie, because if it seems like I could watch the first, second, and fourth without watching this movie after I finish Mockingjay Part 2, my rating for this movie is going to drop lower. I think another main problem with this movie is, like I said, it doesn't necessarily feel like anything happened, and a lot of the clips feel like it could have been cut out. And I'll see how more of that, I think, when I go into the fourth movie. But like I said, it was a lot of political propaganda back and forth. One side do something, the other reacts, the other side do something, the other one reacts. And they constantly did that multiple times with the Peter Katniss on the news. And honestly, they could have did that like one less time. The scenes of Katniss finally accepting her role, some of them were beautiful and great. Matter of fact, let's get into a few things I actually like, because I did like some things and I just don't want to gripe on it the whole time. So let's get into some likes. Like the scene where she shot down her 2 fighter jets, loved it, brilliant, literally set everything off, really sparked it and got the movie going in a way. Also, prior to that, when she visits the hospital, they all show they're on her side, they're willing to follow her, and she finally understands that her role is important to these people. Then that scene is beautiful as well. Probably the best scene in this entire movie. Literally, in this movie, the best thing about it is Jennifer Lawrence being Katniss Everdeen, because everybody else doesn't feel as important or as prioritized, and it kind of been that way in the prior movies, but there were vital moments that other characters did have, that Rue had her impact on her, Finnick and Joanna with the rebellion, like I said, even Hey Mitch, etc. There were moments they had impact. Even Senna, when he did the Mockingjay for her dress in the second movie. So there were moments they had impact for other characters. But in this one, there really aren't those besides Katniss and Peter, which makes sense, but like I said, it's a bit lackluster. But overall, her performance in this movie, still amazing, still beautiful, still wonderful. The movie also ends rather abruptly after they got Peter back, so we really need to dive into the fourth movie. But let me give my rating. I give this movie like a 6.5, 6 maybe out of 10. And that's a big drop off from the first two movies, especially the last one. But let's dive into Mockingjay Part 2, and then we're going to dive into the last of the franchise as a whole. I almost forgot to check the Rotten Tomatoes score for this movie, but it looks like the critics have it at a 69%, while the fans have it at a 71%. So yes, they were definitely less receptive to this one than the last two movies, and for good reasons, I would say. The Mockingjay Part 2. Now, this movie is a bit strange and confusing to say the least, and we'll get into the reasons why. But first, the plot. The rebellion is finally here. Everybody's standing up to the Capitol. They're about to march on the Capitol, finally take over Pan Am, basically, is the plot of this whole movie. And why I think it's strange, because even though Katniss is the Mockingjay, she's the hero, the savior, she doesn't really do anything in this movie necessarily. It's like once she became the face of the rebellion, that's all he needed her for. Throughout the entire movie, she didn't necessarily do anything to propel the rebellion any further or to make sure it was successful. And the only thing she did this movie that had any sort of impact technically was killing President Cohen from District 13 at the very end. But other than that, her and her closest team of allies that she trusted over several movies are trying to find a way to the Capitol so she could assassinate President Snow. But by the time she finally reaches that point and gets to the Capitol, she then lost half her team and she doesn't even get the job done. Like, the whole plan basically succeeded in her absence. Like, while she was doing all that, when she finally reached the Capitol, the rebels attacked. They took over the Capitol. They bombed everything. And they essentially won without her help. They just needed her to be the face in the prior movies. And once they had her as the face, she really didn't do anything else. Also, this movie is very strange in the fact that it's very slow in the beginning, like very slow. But once the ball starts rolling, that ball does not stop. Like, literally, I see she had a small team of allies that she trusted, and a few of them died in the movie. So the first one, Bugs, when he died, okay, it was a little weird timing. It happened out of nowhere, but it was a surprising death. But once he died, her teammates started falling like dominoes, like back to back to back. Like, multiple catastrophic deaths started happening after the Bugs. Then they lost the girl commander. Then Finnick died with the Mutts. Then it led all the way up to Prim dying at the Capitol. Like, literally, there was no shortage of crazy deaths just snowballing out of nowhere. And once the plot or once the events started rolling, they just did not stop. Like, they were back to back to back to back. And while I do technically like the ending, her killing President Cohen, didn't want her in power either. She's also the person who set off the bombs that killed Prim at the Capitol when Prim was helping everybody that was injured. While I do like that ending, her and Peter ending, them having kids, etc. While I did like the ending, how we got there was just so bizarre. Like, it really had nothing to do with Katniss in this movie technically. Like, it doesn't feel like she really did anything. Literally, there was a moment in the movie where the President Snow put out a video saying Katniss was dead, blah, 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 and President Coin making a response video saying she died for all her people. Now the rebels are stronger than ever. They just has a chance to fight for her, etc., dead or alive, etc. Basically saying she wasn't really needed for the rebellion anymore. So it literally doesn't feel like she accomplished anything in this movie. And once again, I love the ending, like how the story ended. I think that's how it should have ended. I just don't like the events of how it got there. It felt like all the setup they did in the prior movies didn't pan out to what this was supposed to be. Now, what I would say about a lot of the action scenes they did have were fucking awesome and amazing when they were trying to escape some of the peacekeepers or when they were fighting the Mutts and Finnick died. That scene alone was just fucking awesome and amazing. Like, I watched that scene literally 3 times before I even continued the movie. That scene, it was Katniss, Peter, Gail, Finnick, I believe Joanna, and I can't remember the other girl name, but basically they were all fighting the Mutts, and it was Polix, but they were fighting the Mutts, and that was probably my favorite scene in the movie. Like, it was pretty fun to watch, interesting, and pretty good choreographed, I would say. But I did say when we're reviewing the third movie that depending on how the fourth go, I might even have the third movie even lower. And I low-key might for sure have it at like a 6 now, because those events really didn't matter for this movie at all now that I'm really seeing it. I guess Katniss got the districts on her side and got more rebels for them to go against the Capitol. I guess she got that done in that movie, but other than that, she didn't really feel like she did anything in that movie that transferred over to this one that made all that happen necessary. A few things I'm happy about, not necessarily happy about, but the love triangle, I'm happy that's finally over. The Gal Peter love triangle, I think that should have been ended. I don't even see what made her and Gal, like, it was so strange. I never mentioned it going throughout all the movies, but she used to just, they'll be talking about her and her relationship with Peter, and she'll just kiss him out the blue. That happened multiple times throughout the entire series, and it never felt right. It felt like weird, like she was gaslighting him or whatever. And I'm like, bro, she don't want to be with this guy. Why is they forcing this weird love triangle when she's obviously in love with Peter? But I'm happy that's finally over. We also got a great moment with Finnick, like I said, a great death with him. An amazing scene, like I said, they were fighting all the Mutts. He got caught up, he was the last one down there, and he just got savaged. He just got wrecked. But we also got the moment, I love the moment of her killing President Cohen. Like I said, I don't like the moments leading up to that, but that moment was awesome. They thought she was about to assassinate President Snow. He was tied up, but she shot President Cohen, and that was a spectacular moment. I also once again love the ending, the aftermath, her talking to her kids, telling them her stories, how she still have nightmares, how she survived, how the way she gets through is she goes through everything that someone did good in the world, no matter how small, and that's how the nightmare subsides for her. And I think that was pretty good storytelling, pretty good writing at the end. I just wish it led up to that a bit better. Because to be honest, this whole movie could have just been an aftermath movie of showing her aftermath. 'Cause she really didn't do anything that had any impact besides the killing of President Cohen. But once again, this movie also still had an amazing cast, added some more characters, so it gave them some more shine. I love Patina Miller in this movie and multiple other characters. But this movie, I think the box office numbers were the lowest for the entire franchise, literally less than the first movie, and I think that says a lot. It grossed only $653 million, which for me definitely isn't anything to scoff at, but it grossed almost $700 million for the first movie alone, over $800 million for the second one, and over $750 million for the third. So for the final movie, the biggest one of the series, the one with all the stakes, are supposed to be the highest, that's supposed to give us everything we want, for it to gross the lowest amount in the series is kind of crazy and bizarre, and speaks to my thinking that this movie is a bit bizarre. If I had to give it a rating, I would probably give it about a 7. And yes, I still liked it better than the third movie because there were more shots and scenery pieces I liked. And also, we were given more moments of impact. Different characters had different moments that mattered in the movie. And I might not have liked how they played out, but they were big and heartfelt moments. So definitely my movie rankings would be the second movie, then the first, then the fourth, then the third. So it'd be Catching Fire, then the original Hunger Games, Mockingjay Part 2, and then Mockingjay Part 1, I guess. And I honestly think that watching this, that has to be like some sort of consensus movie rankings. I don't see how most people can have it any different. And the Rotten Tomato score for this, for the critics, is at 70%, and for the audience is actually at 66%. And I think for a majority of these movies, the audience score is actually lower than the critics, which is funny and usually surprising because critics usually hate this and audience usually love this. But like I said, I gave it a 7 out of 10, so I definitely understand these tomato scores. But now we're about to jump into the conclusion of the franchise. Like I said, is it a masterpiece? How prestigious it is? Is it a classic? Its impact on other shows, movies, for the future, the amount of money it made, and just so much. Everything in Hunger Games, basically. So this is the part I've been waiting for. Let's dive into that. So the Hunger Games experience in retrospect, and how big and prestigious is it now? And I already told you guys it spearheaded the way for other dystopian style movies and TV shows like The Maze Runner, Divergent, The 100, etc. But honestly, I would go as far as to say it is one of the biggest YA films and franchises of all time. I would have it third to only the Harry Potter films and franchise and the Twilight films and franchise. The movies combined grossed a whopping $2.9 billion, basically $3 billion, and of course that can't compete with Harry Potter grossing over $7 billion, and I think Twilight did over $5 billion, but it still was one of the biggest franchises and one of the biggest adaptations of all time, and I would definitely have it third on the YA franchises list. I also think the Hunger Games benefited from not only being one of the first and early on dystopian style movies on the franchise, they also did it and got out early, because the first movie came out in 2012 and they did them all in following years all the way to 2015. So by the time 2014, when they had a third movie, The Maze Runner and Diversion was just beginning having their first movie, and then 1 year later Hunger Games will be finished and done. So they benefited by not only being first, but being exponentially quick about getting in and out and getting the fans what they wanted. I also think because of how well it worked, their tropes are used through other movies and TV shows, through other means, like I said, of media, entertainment, etc. I think Battle Royales definitely had to be inspired for that. Of course, they were always a thing, but the Hunger Games predates how the boom of Battle Royale. So I think a little inspiration could come from that. I pointed out the part of Squid Game, the spectacle of it all, how that felt a little like Hunger Games. So their inspiration is definitely there. I also think the franchise as a whole rates at about a 7.5 for all the movies, which also puts it in the upper echelon of movie franchises, because most movie franchises with several movies, 3, 4, 5, they aren't as good or as consistent as they keep going. But I would say Hunger Games is one of the more consistent ones, and it delivers majority of the time. And the biggest thing I wanted to point out, and hopefully you stay for this part, I might put a little teaser at the beginning of the video for this part, because this is the part I really wanted to talk about, is it could be like the Game of Thrones, how Game of Thrones is now. And what I mean by that, obviously, is not the best movie of all time. Game of Thrones was considered one of the best shows of all time. But the dystopian style shows and stuff did die. And the Hunger Games movies kind of fell off towards the end. Not necessarily in quality, but as far as popularity and more. And Game of Thrones was able to revitalize itself with House of the Dragon. And with the terrible ending they had in the old franchise, being able to revitalize and make it work did wonders for them. So now, with a new Hunger Games movie down the pipeline coming at the end of the year, it's a prequel. They have a chance to revitalize the whole franchise and even the dystopian franchise as a whole. It has a chance to cause an uprising and bring back this revitalized dystopian style movies for the long term, depending on how this new movie performs at the box office. And once again, it is a prequel, just like House of the Dragon was a prequel for Game of Thrones. So it could work out perfectly. They could implement new things, make it more interesting, and if it works out, these could also get several movies and become its own franchise. Not its own franchise because it's still part of the Hunger Games, but its own storyline that gets several movies over time. So, is it a masterpiece? I would say no, but is it a prestigious franchise and a classic? I would definitely have to say so. Like I said, spearheaded the dystopian style movies and TV shows, one of the biggest YA films of franchises of all time, third on my list behind Harry Potter and Twilight. And it is now being given the chance to revitalize all that and take it a step further to a higher level and be even more of a classic and prestigious than it already was. So here's their chance coming this year. But that's it for this video. It took a lot of hours watching all the movies, a lot of editing, finding clips, the little research, not a lot, but enough to get my points across and look into the details of these movies. And I hope you guys enjoy. If you did, I'm probably going to do Maze Runner Divergent or the 100 sooner or later. These type of videos take a while. It's a longer style of videos, especially finding the time to watch all of them and really watch them, like pay attention to everything. But if you do like it, be sure to leave a like, comment, subscribe. Let me know what you want to see next. Also, if you're interested in any other types of pop culture TV shows and movies, I do teen drama shows and movies on Tuesdays. You could check those out. And I also do Power. If you're interested in Power, you can go check that out. But just give a look around the channel, see if you find some things interesting. As usual, leave a like, comment, subscribe, and I'm out.